When I was 4 years old, I was horridly brainwashed by the whimsical charm of animated minions, unaware of the implications that slowly sculpted my childhood. It's hard to find someone who isn't familiar with the minions. Growing up in Taiwan, these yellow creatures polluted every shopping mall, every commercial, and every toy in my collection. In fact, the first thing I bought at the airport when I arrived in America was a fluffy minion plush toy. It was years later when I started questioning whether there was a connection between the world's obsessive consumerism towards these characters and the films that produced them. Despite being a popular family film intended for merchandising, 2010's Despicable Me conveys a radical showcasing of capitalistic oppression through a power-hungry protagonist who takes advantage of alienated minions and innocent children, who are both depicted as eager servants to a selfish despot. First, I will introduce the plot of the film and the reasons behind its skyrocketing popularity in everyday consumerism. Then I'll explain how the film promotes negative stereotypes of workers and children in a capitalist society. Despicable Me is a movie that narrates the story of Gru, a middle-aged man with goals of becoming a master criminal. However, the true focus of the movie is on the small yellow minions, dressed in dungarees, who are central to the story and the comedy. With the help of his servant minions, Gru aspires to steal the moon through a shrink ray. As part of his scheme to steal back his shrink ray from Vector, his arch-nemesis, Gru acquires 3 girls from the adoption center: Margot, Edith, and Agnes. After his plan succeeds, Gru reluctantly shelters the girls, treating them with malice and aggression. Once he steals the moon, the film ends with a grand confrontation with Vector, in which Gru heroically saves the girls. This film was released by Illumination in 2010, grossing a total of $300 million and making over $500 million in merchandise sales, which was certainly reflected over my everyday life. These adorable creatures appealed to billions of people and were sold through the form of any branded products imaginable until the color yellow became synonymous with minions. However, to truly determine the effects this film had on its wide audience, we must analyze it through a postmodern lens. The first step to understanding the capitalist evil behind this film is analyzing the role of the minions themselves, who symbolically reflect foreign labor and exploitation. The meaning of their collective name is hard to miss. They are eternally exploited workers who are dressed and treated the same, forced to carry out orders of Gru with no reward for their tedious labor. Their yellow skin color signifies both a segregated nationality and a collective entity under capitalist suppression, making it impossible for them to reject or abandon their identity. They are highly interchangeable and desperate for any job they can find. The appearance of the minions strips them away from their individuality, where their gender and names are completely irrelevant. Particularly, we can draw connections between the minions and the Hispanic workers of the early 20th century, who both face harsh conditions for their race and origins. However, while real-life workers longed for independence from exploitative labor, the minions convey a harmful message that workers must be instilled with jubilant pride and excessive support for their boss. The argument of them being model proletariats under a capitalist system is emphasized by their tireless work and their inability to age or die, even under explosives or poison. Somehow they always seem to act happy under tedious jobs. Additionally, the fact that the minion language is made up of a combination of Spanish, French, Italian, and English further presses the point of them symbolizing exotic immigrants who wealthy Americans like Gru often take advantage of for their naivety and desperation. In fact, the theme of capitalist exploitation is displayed not only in minions, but also in the 3 girls that Gru adopts. Similarly to a capitalist job system where people are only valued for their inputs, the 3 girls actively try to sell their individual qualities in pursuit of adoption and acceptance. With this assumption, we can view Gru as someone who embraces the use of cheap child labor for his own benefit. In fact, the reason why he adopts the girls is for their innocence and gullibility, which he uses as part of his plan to steal back the shrink ray. This type of exploitation paints a really negative depiction of how children are valued in a world driven by self-interest. In particular, Agnes is shown as a pure and contagiously cheerful child. However, when Gru arrives at the adoption center, she displays a desperate notion of selling her qualities to Gru in order to gain affection. Despite the constant verbal abuse, fatherly ignorance, and selfish exploitation, Agnes constantly looks up to Gru as an inspiring figure, which can be juxtaposed with the behavior of minions. On the other hand, Margot, the oldest of the girls, is illustrated as a rebel against Gru's oppressive behavior. However, when she gets kidnapped by Vector, she becomes entirely reliant on Gru as a masculine savior and suddenly loses all the reluctance that she had before, ultimately emphasizing how much child laborers are dependent on their leader. While Despicable Me displays itself as a comedic family film, it conveys several harmful capitalist themes regarding the model working class and the exploitation of children's labor. As proven through the Minions, the film paints a positive image of inescapable labor and the embracing of a working-class identity. And through the adopted girls, the film emphasizes how children are often exploited for their qualities and overly dependent on their leader. Overall, Despicable Me forces us to ask the question, are universally accepted family films really safe for children, or are they secretly molding our next generation into a system of content labor and dependency?